Hi there, Alison here with another Cabernet Franc du jour. Today we're in Saumur-Champigny and we're looking at the Château Yvonne 2020 La Folie Saumur-Champigny. Since 2007, Château Yvonne has been in the hands of Mathieu Vallée, but the estate has a long viticultural history that dates back to the 16th century. The modern story of the estate begins in 1997 when the property was purchased by Jean-François and Yvonne Lamunière, who christened the estate Château Yvonne. Now, under the guidance of Françoise Foucault, the wife of the late Charly Foucault of Rougeard, over the next 10 years, the estate quickly established itself as a rising star in the Saumur-Champigny appellation, with organic viticulture being the cornerstone of the domaine's philosophy. Mathieu has since upheld this legacy and has taken things one step further by converting the estate to biodynamics by 2012. The estate is comprised of 16 hectares worth of vineyards, 10 of which are Cabernet Franc, and the vineyard parcels are dotted across 4 neighboring communes that hug the bank of the Loire River in Saumur-Champigny. From west to east, we have Souzay-Champigny, Parnay, Turquant and Monsoreau. Now, today's wine is coming from 7 different lieux-dits, all located in the commune of Souzay-Champigny. We have les Mouchards, les Chalons, les Gagneries, les Vignerons, Clos, la Maisonnette, and la Noue. And all of these lieux-dits are located in the center of this commune. Now, if you recall from a previous video, there are 3 areas for viticulture in the commune of Souzay-Champigny. So hugging the Loire River, there's this area of vineyards that stretches about 1 kilometer, and here we are about 45 to 55 meters above sea level, and the bedrock influence here is the Turonian tuffeau chalk, and we do have both the upper and the middle Turonian tuffeau chalk here, depending on where your vines are situated in this part of the commune. Likewise, about 3.5 kilometers to the southwest, so set back from the Loire River, we have another area of vineyards that is at a similar elevation, and again we find the influence of the Turonian era tuffeau chalk. Now, in the center of the commune, in and around the hamlet of Champigny, and where all these lieux-dits are located, which is in the center here, the picture in terms of the terroir is completely different. So here, this area of vineyard stretches around 2 kilometers from north to south, and we're sitting on this very large limestone bench or plateau, and we're at an elevation of about 72 to 84 meters above sea level. Now, this limestone is very different from the Cretaceous era Turonian tuffeau chalk that we find in the rest of the commune. So this limestone dates to the Eocene era, which means it was formed around 36 to 55 million years ago, whereas the Turonian tuffeau chalk is quite a bit older. It was formed around 89 to 93 million years ago. And this Eocene era limestone is a freshwater limestone or a lacustrine limestone. It's about 2 meters or 6.5 feet thick, and it's a very hard, dense limestone. So it has it's very hard, very dense, as I said, and it's extremely resistant to erosion. And because of these properties, centuries ago, this limestone was actually quarried for the use of building materials, specifically cobblestones for streets as well as other structures. In fact, these properties that this limestone has for building purposes was most notably discovered by engineer Louis-Alexandre de César, who was responsible for the construction of the César Bridge in Saumur, which stretches across the Loire River and was finished in 1770. Now, what does any of this have to do with wine? Well, this plateau of limestone, which is known locally as la Pierre de Champigny, because of its density, it has very good drainage and very low fertility. And this area was prized for viticulture, most notably by the monks of the nearby Abbey de Fontfroid, who played a very important role in the cultivation of grapevines here before the end of the French Revolution. So this little pocket in Souzay-Champigny has had a long history of viticulture, specifically because of this special type of limestone. So getting back to today's wine, this is coming from 5 hectares worth of vines. The vines are around 15 to 50 or so years of age. And in terms of topsoil, we have about 40 to 60 centimeters worth of topsoil. And it's predominantly a clayey texture or a clay silty texture, but we're looking at about at least 40% clay content in the topsoil. And because of this freshwater limestone and this clay topsoil, Mathieu explained to me that these soils here are actually a little bit on the cooler side. So this gives us a little bit, it helps to really slow down the growing season. And this gives us slightly longer hang time, but it doesn't contribute to excessive sugar accumulation. Rather, it helps to preserve the acidities. And this little bit extra time we have actually gives us a chance for more enhanced phenolic development or phenolic ripeness of both the skins as well as the seeds. And this does lead to more pronounced tannins, I should say, in terms of the finished wine. Now, in terms of today's wine, from a winemaking perspective, this wine was all hand-picked fruit, and in the case of the 2020 vintage, 20% of the fruit was left whole cluster for some added freshness and levity, and then the rest of the fruit was destemmed, and fermentation takes place in 50 hectoliter concrete vats, and it spends about 3 weeks on skins, and there's very little by way of extractive techniques during this time. And then élevage takes place in large conical wooden vats where the wine rests for about 8 months before bottling. So I should note as well before getting into this wine that this wine is very young. It's a 2020 and I have had this wine open for quite a while to give this wine some oxygen so I could get a better sense of where it is at. And on the nose is still a little bit shy, a little bit compressed, but it is starting to show some nice fruits here. Specifically more red fruits. I'm getting some nice fresh ripe red cherry. There's a little bit of like a black currant juice note here, a little bit of wild blueberry. But the fruits, of course, are very primary at this stage. And the wine actually does lean a little bit more fruit forward. The pyrazines are dialed a little bit of a ways back, I think, but they are of course there. Of course, this is Cabernet Franc we're talking about. So there is this evergreen component, like a little bit of a spruce tips, and there's also like a lovely fresh thyme note as well. But there's a lot of layers to the nose here. You can sense that there's a lot of depth here, and it has some place that it wants to go. I'm getting a little bit also of like a bit of a violet note, and there's also like a whetstone thing happening on the nose too, but very pretty on the nose. On the palate, those same fruits come through really nicely. It's a bit more open on the palate than it was on the nose. And there's a little added like a pomegranate note, which is quite nice. It adds a little bit of a zip to the palate. And then in addition to that, there's some other interesting layers that I want to note. Particularly, there's a little bit of a coffee note as well as a bit of a cured black olive note on the palate as well, which is quite interesting. Now, in terms of the acidity in this wine hits differently. It's fresh, it's very vibrant, it has a buoyancy to it, but it doesn't really intermingle with the fruit and the tannin in the same way. It almost kind of comes in at the end, which is kind of different than what I'm used to. It sort of follows with this acid as opposed to being more fresh in the mouth when the wine is in your mouth per se. Now, in terms of the tannins are really interesting. They are quite firm, and they do have a how do I say? They do have a directness, if that's even a word. They are direct in terms of their texture, and they're not velvety. They're more of a tightly woven, I would say, more like cotton or perhaps like a fine linen. But there is a certain focus to the tannins and a certain directness to the tannins, which is quite interesting. The wine has a fleshy character. There is density to this wine, which makes sense because, of course, there is a stronger clay influence here. So that kind of stands to reason. Yeah, this wine is really interesting. There's a breadth to the wine, there's a fullness to the wine in terms of how the tannins and the acid are working with the fruit. What's really notable here is the wine feels quite sturdy to me, quite upright, very unwavering, if you will, as if I can visualize like a 200-year-old oak tree or a giant redwood in California, where it is anchored and no amount of wind is ever going to knock that thing over. So there is a sturdiness about this wine, which is quite interesting. And when I was emailing a bit with Mathieu with regards to this wine, the thing I was curious about is the influence of this freshwater limestone in terms of the tannins and the texture of the tannins. And he explained to me that this limestone does contribute to a wine that is a bit more monolithic and rigid in its youth, and with tannins that are a bit more strict, which I can totally see because there is something going on different about the tannins here. Whereas with Tufo, I find that the Cabernet Franc tannins tend to have a bit more pliability to them, whereas these tannins are a little bit more rigid. And that's by no means a slight. Really, I think it's just a matter of time, giving this wine a bit of time to soften. This wine needs a bit of patience if you are going to open it young. As I said, I've had this open for a few hours, but I do really think that this probably needs at least a year in the bottle. I think it's going to make a world of difference, but ideally I think it needs about 3 years before it's going to be in that really sweet spot as far as its current evolution is concerned. If you have a favorite wine from Château Yvonne, do let me know what it is in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.